I'm Mike Brown, author, nerd, and host of the Dark Poutine podcast. Join me and Morgan Knudsen, author, paranormal researcher, and host of the TV shows Paranormal 911 and Haunted Hospitals, as we take you on a journey for the curious about the unseen, the mysterious, and the incredible things happening in the world about us. Welcome to Supernatural Circumstances. Looking back on my life, my all-time favorite people have always been storytellers. And funnily enough, everyone has a story to tell, so I guess I just like people. I love to listen to folks share their experiences, even from events in which I was involved. Perspectives are always different from person to person, and you can learn a lot about someone just by listening to them tell a tale of even the most mundane things. Yes, I'm one of those weirdos who find the dreams of others fascinating. In this episode, Morgan talks about the importance of the storyteller in tales of the paranormal. And later on, in the interview portion of the show, you'll hear from a well-known storyteller when you hear our conversation with documentary filmmaker Seth Breedlove. Hailing from Ohio, Seth's interest in cryptids, folklore, and other stories of the unexplained led him to found the production company Small Town Monsters in 2015, through which he has written, produced, edited, and directed a variety of short and feature films. He's covered a ton of the biggies, from The Beast of Bray Road, The Boggy Creek Monster, The Mothman of Point Pleasant, American Werewolves, and most recently, Bloodlines, The Jersey Devil Curse. You can find Seth Breedlove's films on different streaming platforms and can learn more at smalltownmonsters.com. Now, here's Morgan.
The arts have always had a foundation of storytelling. Whether it be film, television, books, painting, dance, or theater, or simply a tale by the fireside, humans have been gifted with the ability to capture one another's imagination through expression. It is a rather new thing for humanity to begin to extend this art to true stories of the paranormal, and this can run us into trouble or become a mode of truthful expression. We have the ability to enhance, elaborate, examine, and even lie about stories, depending on the outcome the producer wishes to have. It takes a unique individual to be able to hear human stories and then retell them in a way that allows the audience to examine the content. This is something we rarely even do for ourselves. In my book, The Gift of Instinct, I give prime examples of how stories can become more than they were ever intended to be. The Dybbuk Box, Slender Man, and even stories with an underlying course of truth, like The Jersey Devil and Mother Leeds. And yet, in many cases, these folkloric stories can be examined to discover a truthful reality. And without the storyteller, these stories are forgotten and lost to our busy and sometimes controversial history. This is perhaps the very importance of the storyteller themselves. They are the preservers of time past and the keepers of the stories of ages. How we tell a story can say much about a person and less about the subject, and nowhere do we see that more than in the case of the paranormal and reporting in general. How someone decides to tell a story has the ability to allow the audience to draw their own conclusions and encourage critical thinking, or to shut down discussion with rhetoric and criticism. It can spark wonder and imagination, or it can frighten us to never inquire into a subject again. The importance of the storyteller, especially in regards to the paranormal and folklore, is absolutely crucial. It becomes a glimpse into the mindset of the time or era and an understanding from which a storyline or line of thinking began. In order to get to the truth of any matter, one has to be able to think. Without thinking, we lose the ability to get to the bottom of a story. A storyteller of the paranormal has a very unique position. They get to guide the viewer through a range of emotions, thought, and sometimes facts to seek a conclusion, whether it be their own or the storyteller's. This doesn't mean a person will reach the conclusion the storyteller intends, and in the case of Slender Man, that was such an example. Eric Knudsen writes a horror story for an online magazine, and not long after, Two young girls attempt the murder of their third friend in Wisconsin, stabbing her multiple times and leaving her for dead. This is where the role of the listener becomes crucial. The ability to not only listen and receive stories, but also to tell our own. What dialogue are we telling ourselves on a daily basis? Each one of us is a storyteller, and how we tell our own story, especially when we have a paranormal encounter, will determine how we progress with the world afterwards. We rely on both the story keepers of the world and our own ability to shape our narrative, to refine how we see our reality around us. The story keepers must never be taken for granted, because it is the crucial process of retelling, no matter what the format, which allows us as humans to hold on to tales that offer us clues into our future. They aren't simply a representation of outdated ideas or silly stories, but rather information that we may otherwise forget, which allows us a fuller understanding of where we are going. I am really, really glad, as we were mentioning off air, Seth, that we are just really glad to have you. So welcome to Supernatural Circumstances. And Seth, meet Mike. Mike, meet Seth.
Hey, Seth, welcome.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure, and actually, just about 2 days ago, I got done with your latest documentary, Bloodlines, about the Jersey Devil, and you again did a stellar job. So congratulations on that.
Cool, thank you. Did I send you guys a link? I should have done that if I did not.
I am always happy to support the artist, so
okay.
Don't feel bad.
Yeah.
No, it was great, and you have this knack for storytelling and being able to convey the facts within something that's really entertaining, and it was just really, really, really good. And we did a number of what was it, almost a year ago, Mike, that we did the Jersey Devil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been quite some time.
It's been quite some time, yeah. But it was, yeah, as I say, just fantastic. And but I wanted to get into this a little bit with you about what you do with Small Town Monsters, because I think what you're bringing to the table with this documentaries that you do is just phenomenal. And but you didn't start there. You started as a filmmaker in Ohio. What was your initial want to tell story through film? Where did that start for you?
Oh, wow, you're starting off on my kind of foot.
Excellent.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, actually, like I did start with STM. I mean, technically, before this, I was like a medical biller, and before that, I tiled floors, and before that, I repossessed homes, and I did some FedEx ground delivery driving, and so I'm not a filmmaker certainly not by education. I had no formal education in filmmaking. But my mom, I guess, is the reason I'm into film. We were raised on like the Marx Brothers and Ray Harryhausen movies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I grew up my mom was like an OG geek, in the like the 50s and 60s, before that was a thing. She was like the ultimate nerd when she was a kid, and she's the one that got me into filmmaking, and that was, I guess, like watching Harryhausen, and especially like the Hammer horror stuff, which we reference back to a lot visually in our movies, even today. That's what got me into filmmaking. Like, that's what made me aware that filmmaking was a thing, and that people actually made these movies, and they didn't just magically appear in front of us.
Right. Which screens. I think people still think that sometimes.
Yeah, no, and it's definitely, as a kid, it's totally normal for that to be the case. And I still remember, like, I remember the first time I watched a movie where I became like vaguely aware that people made movies was seeing King Kong at there was a car dealership, and my dad was buying a car, which used to be a very extensive process that would take most of the day. And I remember watching King Kong on the television there, and they kept cutting to these like behind the scenes photos and stuff about Willis O'Brien doing the stop motion on the movie. And that was the first time I became aware that people made movies. I don't know if I had any interest in making a movie myself until I saw Harryhausen and Hammer horror stuff. But that was where it all began for me, with like, monsters and that kind of thing. I'm not a big horror guy. I don't love like the horror genre. In fact, like I watch very few horror. I think the only horror movie I've seen this year is Nope. But I'm a monster fan, and I guess that plays into what we do. I don't know how to marry the two. Like, I don't know how to marry cryptids and the paranormal with like my interest in filmmaking. I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker when I was a kid. But I, I'm a real dolt. Like I'm dumb as a box of rocks. Like I barely graduated high school. And so like the fact that I'm making movies is really wild, because this is the only thing I'm good at. And when I was graduating high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do, and filmmaking seemed unrealistic, despite the fact that I was making short films with friends on like Sony Handycams that we would splice together in Apple Movie and things like, like all the stuff that you did when in the
Absolutely.
the very early days of like digital. And we have those movies lying around somewhere, but they weren't about cryptids or anything. Like we made a lot of like Christopher Guest inspired.
Yeah, that was my next question, actually, was what did those look like?
Yeah,
before that.
They're very like like Waiting for Guffman-esque, this is Spinal Tap style, like parodies.
I don't have a problem with any of that. Just so
I know. I'm thinking this is great.
Yeah, that was the kind of stuff we did. We made two. I remember there were two longer form ones. One was called Blue Collar Afternoon. One was called Blue Collar Morning. They hopefully will never see the light of day. I remember there was a lot of male nudity in one of them.
Oh no!
And so like not like not like anything sexual, just like way too much butt
sure
on camera. So that's what we made, was just not like silly nonsense when we were kids. And that's like, we're talking like 99 through like 2003. So this is like the burgeoning days of like Jackass and CKY and that kind of stuff. So we were in that camp, like, I don't know, post-punk emo phase of our lives. And that's our movies are a weird mix of like everyone in my group loved Christopher Guest, and we loved the idea of like the like the mockumentary in those days, which, just to head it off at the pass, in case anyone listening to this thinks that I'm secretly like pulling some sort of fast one on every one of my movies or a mockumentary, they're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny because everything you're saying reminds me of when I was a kid, and I remember when my business partner Stephanie and I, when we were first faced with the task of creating like an actual live presentation, and it wasn't a very large group of people, but we wanted to bring that theatricality to it, and just like you're saying, I remember getting out she had like two little Sony cams, and they were still with the little tapes and whatnot, and
that's what we shot on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and it was I have such fond memories of that. But
I'm still not clear on how those worked like now, because you would shoot to tape, but then I remember there was a USB plug that would plug into my iMac, and somehow you would edit, but there was this lag that would happen. I mean, I remember it well. Yeah, we edited full movies that way, like 45-minute short films, like bizarre. I can't. The patience must have been through the roof.
But I think it's what we had though at the time, and it's like, and when it's what you have, it's what you deal with,
right?
That's so funny. So you began, like when you got in with to small town monsters. You picked the Minerva monster first. Why was that your first pick?
So I worked at a medical billing job in Canton, Ohio, which I got purely by luck. I was not, like I said, I'm not a very intelligent guy, and that was like the job that would have me for some reason, mostly because it was data entry, and I knew someone at the job who could get me in. And I spent a lot of time, kind of sitting at my computer. What I should have been doing is working, but I was mostly like reading about cryptids and listening to podcasts like Beyond the Edge, the old Beyond the Edge radio that had Eric Altman was one of the big ones that I used to listen to back in the day, which is fitting because that's like, like we've done a pretty decent amount of material about the Chestnut Ridge, and that show was all about the Chestnut Ridge. But yeah, when I was doing that, I had the idea at some point about doing writing a book about cryptids and their impact on rural communities, because I can write, or I could write. I don't think I can anymore, but I used to be a fairly good writer. It was like the only thing I was decent at other than now filmmaking. But back then I was a writer, and I ended up getting a bunch of freelance gigs with like local newspapers. And I used to do like a front page column for a local newspaper that was about like small business, that was called Slice of Life. And then I would write film reviews and things like that. And somewhere in there, I became familiar with the Minerva Monster case. Now, I was familiar with the Minerva Monster as a local legend all the way back to my earliest memories, because I grew up in a town called Bolivar, which is only like 20 minutes down the road. I mean, as the crow flies, it's probably like 8 miles away from Minerva. And so at night, the kids would say, don't go out in the woods or the Minerva Monster will get you. There's that kind of thing flying around in our neighborhood. But I never knew what that was really until I got older. And around this time is when I really became familiar with that case. And I had actually I put together a book proposal, and then before I'd even had the book accepted, I started calling members of the family, the Caton family. And the Catons were this, for those that are unfamiliar, the Minerva Monster is this Bigfoot case from the late 70s that involved a family named the Catons, who lived right off the Lincoln Highway outside of Minerva, Ohio, who had encountered this large hair-covered creature that would come down off the hill behind their house, the forested hill behind their house. And they would see it on an almost nightly basis. And it seemed docile enough until eventually they found one of their dogs, their German Shepherds, dead with its neck snapped, ripped out of its collar, and its neck snapped. And so I had started looking into the case, and then I actually found contact information for the family and started talking to various members of the family over the phone. And this is all the way back in 2013. So in 2014, the summer of 2014, I had become friends with these two guys who had a decent amount of videography equipment that they weren't really putting to use. And I wanted to make a documentary about it. And I ended up talking to them about doing this Minerva Monster documentary. What's funny is we talked about filmmaking and how I wanted to make a movie, like be a filmmaker and all that kind of stuff. I never connected what we were doing to what I had wanted to do for a living until the movie came out. So we started filming in, I think like July of 2014, and it came out in May of 2015. And it wasn't until I saw the lines of like people wrapped around the block, because 1,200 people came out to see Minerva Monster.
Wow.
When it premiered. And the town threw a festival based around its launch. That was the first time I was like, oh, we made a movie. Like, we made a movie that people want to see. That was the first time I considered what I was doing filmmaking. And then like from there, you can see especially with Beast of Whitehall, you can start to see some of the things that inspired me when I was a kid start to come into play. Sure. I watch a ton of movies, and especially documentaries, and always have. And I think you can
That's always been
see,
my interest too. I
yeah,
totally agree. Yeah, that's so like you. I'm not super into horror, but I love the documentaries around this stuff because to me it's just to me that's where the fascination is. You don't have to make up something scary.
right. Yeah. So that was how it all blossomed, I guess, was in 2015. The movie came out, and then I realized we were making movies, and then I was like, okay, I'm going to take what we made, what little we made, because at that time, and it's funny because it's just 2015, but even in 2015, there wasn't really a digital platform for me to launch anything onto completely independently other than YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't do that. We didn't put it on YouTube. We put it on DVD and Blu-ray. And then the next year, 2016, Amazon opened up their now defunct creator platform, which I can't even remember the branding that they put on it, but that was how we made our name. Was we put Beast of Whitehall was out by then, and Minerva Monster and Boggy Creek Monster. Those three all came out around the same time on that platform, and they really exploded, and that's what led to the us doing what we're doing today, which is just trying to do everything independent that we wish television and major movies would do.
So small towns are your bread and butter, obviously. What is it about small towns that you think is attractive? What attracted you to this as an interest? Yeah.
Well, I grew up in a small town. Bolivar is a tiny town. I want to say it's less than 2,000 people living in Bolivar. Honestly, it might be less than that. So I grew up in a small town, but it's probably from staring out the window of my parents' van while we traveled through small towns around the U.S. when I was a kid, because my parents owned a bookstore, and we did book shows on the weekend from March every year through November. We were on the road doing book shows and setting up at historical book seminars around the country, and we spent a ton of time in small towns. So I think that's where my love for like Mayberry on like Andy Griffith, like that kind of thing. I was fascinated by that. But I did notice when I was first getting into this that the cases that really were attractive to me, they weren't centered around like Houston or Chicago. It was centered around some small town in the middle of nowhere, in Missouri or something. And I was interested in how that case or that monster story or whatever would impact those communities. But yeah, the fact is I grew up in the sticks, and I'm a country boy, despite the fact that I'm not a country boy. Like, I don't listen to country music or drive a pickup truck, but like I'm much more comfortable in the middle of nowhere.
I get that, and small towns, like I'm here in Edmonton, Alberta, and I mean Alberta is the explosion of small towns everywhere, and it's interesting because over the years of investigating and visiting some of these places, that people in small towns, I find it's either been 50-50. Either people really want to talk or they do not want to talk. Have you found that too?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, they're either all in or they want you to go die. Yeah, I
Sounds
mean,
right.
that's a really accurate way of putting it, the way you put it. So I've lucked out in the last year or 2 years, I guess, now that Heather's been with us, but Heather does my quote unquote research for STM now. But for the first 5 years of the company, I did all those phone calls and asking people if they would do interviews. And that's the most common thing you run into is people are either all about it or they're hanging up on you or trying to figure out what you're wanting to get from them. But I think, it makes sense. You're talking to people in rural communities a lot of the time who are concerned that they're going to be like the laughing stock in a very small community where everyone knows everyone. And some people don't care, and some people care very much. And so that's a really common thing that we run into. I mean, when you go on an actual shoot, that's when all the chips are on the table, because like we've had communities where we were threatened with jail time for filming anywhere near certain locations, and then we've been in other locations, other towns, where all the doors are open to us and we can do anything we want, and we're treated like local celebrities or something. And honestly, I don't have a preference. I don't care. I can work either way. One thing I'm somewhat decent at is not convincing people, sounds like the wrong, like I'm trying to pull one over on someone, but
Right.
I'm good at talking to people and putting them at ease. That's like the one thing I'm somewhat good at. I mean, that's why we are where we are, honestly, because Minerva wouldn't have happened if I hadn't managed to get the people involved that we did get involved. And I was able to do that because I grew up from their part of the state. And, I was relatively convincing in that they thought I knew what I was doing, even though I had no idea what I was doing then, and I still have no idea what I'm doing today.
Yeah, it's funny though that you mentioned that with some of the people. We had a small town here that a friend of mine and I investigated for a while, and I remember we were going door to door. It was very rural Alberta, farms and things like that. And I remember this one incident where we actually went to the house of the local historian, and she was really excited that we were interested in the local history, and she thought that was great. And she, said, come on in. And so we're standing there talking to her, and she was like, well, which town is it that you're interested in? And we told her, and it, like, her face changed as we were talking with her. And she said, we can't talk about that. I don't want to talk about that. And if you knock on any doors that and ask questions about that, you're likely to get shot.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the craziest thing. And we just kind of backed out of her house.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, and we kept investigating the case and whatnot, but it was shocking just how much weight and gravity this stuff has in these small areas. Do you find that there's occasionally a sort of a darker history to a lot of places that people don't want to talk about, and it's until you start digging that you start to figure out what it is?
The only one that stands out that I can immediately think of is Bray Road.
Right.
Other than that, like I've had that almost exact same interaction with a historian, actually.
Really?
Yeah, especially
I feel a little less lonely.
Yeah, especially like historical society people, like they don't want you there. Not they, like I don't want to talk that way, because we've had the opposite happen, but a lot of them don't want to. They want their town to be the focus of your interest, or their county or whatever to be the focus of your interest, but they don't want it to be the weird side of that, because they feel like they're going to get painted as this is the place where Bigfoot's seen, or this is the place where ghosts are seen, or whatever. But yeah, I've definitely run into that exact thing multiple times. The only time where I've run into what I think is maybe a dark underbelly to something is, and I don't even know if I should say this out loud, but like Bray Road is the thing. Like there were things, and like Chad and those guys, like from up in that area, like they've probably told you way more than I could, but there's definitely something off about Elkhorn, Wisconsin. There's something off to me about Wisconsin in general. There just seems to be like a weird something's happening under the surface there that I'm not clear about, but that's the only one.
Ed Gein was from Wisconsin, so that kind of says a lot.
Ed Gein, the Slender Man stabbing thing,
exactly.
How to Make a Murderer was set there. But that, I mean, there's the really awesome, I love that story about the night watchman at the the school up there. It wasn't a school. It was like a sanitarium. It's not in Elkhorn, but it's the we covered it in our Bray Road, where the night watchman was patrolling around the graveyard at night and said he saw a werewolf that was saying Gadara.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really cool stuff in that area, but I do think there's we were talking to like people who are involved with the local government who felt like there was weirdness afoot in Elkhorn, even with like highly placed government officials and things like that in that area.
Yeah, it's very similar to Alberta, and and I've had this conversation a number of times with Chad, actually, with Chad Lewis, and where Alberta's got the exact same vibe. And interestingly enough, it's very similar terrain wise. Like it's basically a mirror image of Wisconsin, but same type of vibe, and we have very much the same type of phenomena here. It's like a hotspot for all sorts of really bizarre things. But Alberta also has this sort of underbelly history that nobody talks about. So that's really interesting with Wisconsin as well. So have you ever run into a case going in thinking, I'm going to film about, I'm here to film about a creature, and you find out things are just not what you expected?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'd say 9 times out of 10 that's the case, honestly.
Oh, wow.
In various ways. Like, it might not be anything paranormal, just what I'm expecting of the area is not what I get. Adams was like that with the Bell Witch. It's played up on television as this very like creepy community where you come into it and you can sense the Bell Witch's presence and all that kind of stuff. It's interesting because they play Point Pleasant the same way in West Virginia, where the Mothman was seen. It's this some sort of nexus of weird. And then you get there and you're like, oh, this is like a sleepy Ohio river town that is strangely peaceful. Like this very serene place where I go. I mean, I almost moved to Point Pleasant at one point. But many places we run into things not being as they appear, mostly because, I think so many of these locations, our perception of them are predicated on years of like either television documentaries or paranormal authors or whatever the case may be. And so you go into a place maybe expecting something that isn't actually there. Like, you expect something that isn't there.
Do you think that adds to community mistrust with people who are interested? All these people have been there before, and maybe they've been portrayed in ways that they don't quite like.
Well, yeah, definitely. If it's television, if you're dealing with television, I mean, honestly, at this point, I'm to the place where if something's been covered by TV, I'm really, I'm really hesitant to get into it. Like with the Adams, we were coming in 2-3 years after Ghost. What is it? Ghost. I don't watch a lot of ghost shows, but Ghost Adventures had been there, and whatever had happened with them, they had really left a bad taste in people's mouth. And
that doesn't surprise me somehow.
Yeah, and people were not thrilled that we were there. Thankfully, we had Tim Henson on our side. Tim is the local historian in Adams, and he got us into anywhere we needed to go, and he vouched for us multiple times. But yeah, I think television, and I've dealt with TV people. You got to be careful when you're talking in general terms, like TV people and television, because there's just people that are trying to do their job, and unfortunately, if their job is being told what to do by some suit, that they're going to do everything they can in their power to do that job so they don't lose that job. And it isn't that they're a bad person, it's just that they're trying to do their job. So there is you got to be careful. But that's the good thing about us, is we don't have that. There isn't a guy in a suit presiding over STM. I own the company, but there's so many, we're what, 6 or 7 people on the payroll here, and we all kind of do what we do. Like I don't tell people what to do, really. I try to guide things, but I don't tell Heather when she needs to talk to someone that she has to convince someone to do something or lie to someone, to get them in a movie or anything like that. It's just not how we function. So I do think that these, that a lot of these small towns are very hesitant because of their interaction with television in the past, and especially movies. Like if a film is involved, a fictional film, it gets real dicey. That's when things get real.
I could see that.
Probably are just not going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine, and and you've done so much obviously in the world of film and documentary, but what I love about what you do and what you bring to the table is, you don't just go and record interviews, but often you're shooting live in these specific areas that this stuff has happened. What has that been like for you and the crew?
Yeah, I mean, that's my favorite part of it, is getting out and experiencing the places where we're going. And our movies are broken down into various genres of documentary at this point. Like I think of the Legend movies as being very like cinematic and marrying narrative film with documentary in an interesting way. Like Bloodlines has these 3 little vignettes that are like short films within the documentary. It's an interesting documentary because it's a very dry documentary style that we brought to this one. Like I didn't want to, there's not like a lot of crazy visuals within the documentary portions. We wanted that to come in during the narratives. But then we have something like On the Trail of series. So like On the Trail of UFOs or On the Trail of Bigfoot. And that's a very, like, those are supposed to be us in the field, like experiencing things and actually investigating the topics that we're looking into rather than solely letting our interview subjects tell the story. And then there's stuff like American Werewolves, which is entirely predicated on witness interviews. And so for me, it all depends on the type of project we're working on. Like Mothman Legacy, I've been to Point Pleasant numerous times. And so when you go back there and you're just going to set up shop somewhere and interview 8 people in a studio, it's a little different from something like On the Trail of UFOs, where we're going to travel to 7 different states over the course of like 4 or 5 days and interview numerous people and go on night ops and that kind of thing. But I think no matter what the style of the project is, we always learn more about where we are and come to if not love where we are, then at least respect it in a way. And we never experience, like, just being flat out on, we never experience anything. Like I get asked all the time, like, what's the most interesting thing that happened to you while you were in the field? And it's always like, well,
yeah.
I can pull from like the 2 experiences that I've had in the field over the course of like 70 years and 20 plus movies. But I don't have spooky stories of our own because it never happens. We're there to film a project. I mean, occasionally when you're doing, On the Trail of Bigfoot's a little different. Because a lot of the time we're going into places where it's supposedly an active area. So you might experience something, but for the most part, like, everyone was convinced I was going to come back like demon possessed from Adams. And I'm like, I experienced nothing. I mean, I was told I would be in that cabin and we'd see levitating furniture and all sorts. And like, I was in there for 4 days. I filmed interviews. I sat in the attic by myself. Like I haven't experienced anything. We filmed 7 or 8 episodes of a series called On the Trail of Hauntings that no one's thankfully ever seen, where it was mostly us just like going into haunted locations and then nothing happens. Like Like that, we just didn't. I haven't experienced a lot when we're out in the field. Now I mean, on and off, I've experienced things. The most I've experienced was here in Ohio, in Minerva, when I was making uh, a series called the Bigfoot Project. But other
Oh,
than
wow.
that, I there just isn't. I don't have the spooky stories from the field. But that doesn't mean it's like I said, I come away from every project with like a new, if not love, then at least a respect for where we just were.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. It's funny too, because I think that's the stereotype that most people have about things that are paranormal or cryptozoological or something like that, that this stuff just happens all the time. And it just simply doesn't. And
Mhm.
that's the one thing I know for myself, which drives me a little crazy about some of the ghost hunting shows and things like this, is that, like you were saying, you've got somebody up above that's going, something better happen in every single episode. And if
Right.
it doesn't, then people are bored.
Mhm.
And that's just simply not the way this phenomenon works. It
Mhm.
doesn't work on your time slot or your agenda or anything like that. This is a natural phenomenon that's going to happen when it happens.
Yeah.
My mom, she is a registered nurse of 30 years. And of course, I do the show Haunted Hospitals. And, she was literally nursing in some of the busiest hospitals for 30 years and whatnot, never experienced a thing, and so it's just the way this stuff works.
Mhm. Yeah. I, when it comes to the ghost stuff, it's not my area of, uh, I'm interested in the legend side of it, like what originates a lot of these stories. But as far as like ghosts, it's never been one of my areas of interest. But when we were making um on the Trail of Hauntings, I mean, we were going to places that are supposedly like, if you go in there, you're done. Like you're gonna see, like I was told multiple times that, man, when we did Mansfield Reformatory, you're sunk. Like if you're a skeptic, you're coming out like 100% believer. And I would go in, and we would have. I mean, it was almost like the ghosts heard what was said and just decided they were turning it off for that day, because I mean, we'd have nothing happen. The only thing during that series that I had happen was in a tiny little like unknown location in West Virginia, in Sutton, West Virginia, where the Flatwoods Monster Museum is. We were making an episode in a house, and someone had one of those like a spirit box or whatever, the like
Oh boy.
it shifts through
Right.
channels or something, like whatever I don't know what that stuff does. But the spirit box kept saying my name, which kind of freaked me out. But other than that, I've never experienced, I've never seen anything. I've never experienced like ghostly activity for myself. Now, when I was a kid, my parents owned a very historical building in downtown Bolivar, and we all saw and experienced stuff in that building. But when I was actually looking for anything, nothing ever happened.
Well, and usually that seems to be the case. I mean, I think once we're looking for something, we're conscious of the fact that something's not there. And usually what people have found is that usually these experiences tend to happen when we're not looking for it, when our minds are wandering or we're doing something kind of mundane and we're kind of in that state of allowing. But as soon as you start looking, and Mike, we've talked about this before, is as soon as you start looking, then you're aware of the absence of it. And that seems to be what you get, is the absence of it.
Mhm.
It's yeah, interesting. So you mentioned American Werewolves. It, hands down, one of my favorite documentaries you've done. I don't know
cool.
how many times I've seen it. Yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. And
Thank you.
and you guys went down to the land between the lakes, which is probably one of the most unique cases of dogmen, I think, that has been documented. And you hit exactly what we were talking about, which is that people there seem to be really, really divided. How do you handle that when you get into that kind of a situation?
Um, I mean, in that case, that's one of those movies where Heather handled a lot of this, the
Fair
tough stuff.
enough.
Yeah, I mean, like just to be frank, I mean, like that's her job now, is to kind of take care of that for me. But like Land Between the Lakes is interesting because the people directly from Land Between the Lakes, I don't even think a lot of them understand or realize that there's a connection to the weird in the area. But that is a place where if I had gone to Land Between the Lakes without ever hearing of it in conjunction with like Dogman or Bigfoot or any of it, I still would have been creeped out. Like there's just something off when you're there. And I have my friend Joe Doyle and his wife Jessie, like they go in there and they do investigations for their Hellbent Holler series, and those are the type of people who understand that stuff more than I do. Like I'm not in that case, especially I was not in the woods at night like looking for Dogman or anything. I was solely interviewing witnesses. Right. But if I that's not a place I would feel super comfortable just like packing in a tent and going into the woods for a few nights there. It's just there's something off about the whole thing. And there's such a history, especially the Land Between the Lakes. There's such a history there that something's gone on there. Like especially when it comes to Dogman, I don't know what I think of the phenomenon. I have inklings that it's a supernatural phenomenon, not a natural thing. But there's a history of Bigfoot sightings there too. When you get in there, you're like, oh yeah, like I could see that. Like there's water. There's a lot of uninhabited land and really dense cover. Like it's a perfect place for a Bigfoot. But that had nothing to do with the vibe there. It's just a weird. I mean, maybe it was the fact that we were there when it happened to be like super cloudy and raining and just creepy in general. But it's a strange place.
Yeah, there's areas up here that are very similar, and I know exactly that vibe that you're talking about, where you never quite feel alone. There's something else that's going on. You can't quite put your finger on it. Mike is actually going to be up in Edmonton here this coming weekend, and you'll get to experience that, Mike, when you get here. It's really strange, and it's like you say, it's nothing that you can put your finger on. It's not like, okay, I know there's wildlife or something like that. It's a completely different energy. It's so strange. So it's interesting that Land Between the Lakes had that as well.
Yeah, it's an odd place. I can't honestly, other than that and certain areas on the Chestnut Ridge and then like Bray Road, like Elkhorn area, I haven't experienced that. It's interesting that all the places that I've gone to that have that vibe are connected to the Dogman phenomenon. Yeah. Because if I think of the places we've gone that had that vibe, they're all that. It's like deep woods, Louisiana, where we did the Rougarou movie, or the Chestnut Ridge actually has a long history of werewolf or Dogman sightings, and then Land Between the Lakes. Those are some weird spots.
It's one of the subjects I think that fascinates me so much, and we've got the audience knows we've got a Dogman that lives very close to where I am as well, and it's I just find it completely fascinating. So when you get when you get into a town like this and you've done the filming, you've done the movie, the movie comes out, what type of feedback do you get from these places, or do you get any at all? Do they just try to ignore it, or do they actually comment?
I think early on it was much more obvious because early on when STM was, especially like Minerva and Beast of Whitehall and Boggy, they all had a very set, and even Mothman and Point Pleasant, they all had a very set pattern for release. So we'd put the movie out and then we'd do some sort of premiere or festival directly in the area, and you would have direct feedback from locals. With Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, that changed, and then it never has really fully switched back. Like we don't really, I'm trying to think if I'm talking out of pocket here. We just don't do the level of like local press or local involvement that we used to in the earliest days of STM. And that's more about the fact that we're doing so many projects because we, like we're making 4 or 5 movies a year, and then all the YouTube stuff. So you just don't have time really anymore to go back to a community and do a big premiere. I don't know. As I'm saying this, I'm trying to think that I don't know that we've done like a premiere in a community where we made a movie since Mothman of Point Pleasant. Like it just, like, in a way, I guess it's a shame, but I do know that a lot of times, especially with something like Bray Road, the community doesn't want anything to do with the movie to begin with.
Right.
And so when you're putting the movie out, they don't really care to like host a premiere or have you bring in a premiere.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we get as much interaction with the community after the fact. Now, I keep bringing up Bell Witch, but I do know I became friends with Tim Henson, the local historian in Adams, when we were making Bell Witch, and I've actually made trips back there to hang out with him. And in that case, I know that the community responded really favorably to our movie. I'm trying to think of any others though that was the case, and I can't. I just can't do it when I'm running through the list of what we made. I mean, something like Skinwalker or Howl of the Rougarou, like that town doesn't even exist as it did when we filmed there a couple of years ago.
Wow.
Just because of the hurricane that came through right after. Like so much of that area got wiped out that the last thing on their mind was a documentary about a werewolf, after the movie came out, because most of the town's gone. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't even. Yeah, I can't even imagine. I mean, so many of these little places, they either get lost either from, act of God or whatever is going on. And so much
economy.
Of that economy.
Yeah. That's the big one. I mean, that was what Terror in the Skies was all about. And that's the one with Chad and Kevin. I mean, that whole movie is really about like the vanishing landscape of like middle America, especially small towns, because the Illinois is the perfect place to set a story like that, because those little towns have dried up or disappeared entirely. We made, what was that? Wow, man, it's been a couple of years since I made that movie, so I don't remember the name of the town, but the town, Lawndale, that's what it is. The Lawndale incident where the little boy was picked up by the giant bird and carried.
Right.
When all that happened, that town had a dance hall. It had 2 or 3 grocery stores. It had gas stations. It had restaurants. Today, you would not realize that's a town. Like if you were told this was once a town, it'd be like, really? Like where was anything? Because today it's a few houses, a couple trailers, mobile homes sitting off the side of an interstate. The grain silo was actually closing down when we were there for good. And that was like what was once a very prosperous small town is completely gone. And you do wonder, like, if they had at some point embraced their local monster, if they couldn't have salvaged at least some of the tourism impact to the local economy. But yeah, that is a danger, I think, for a lot of the small towns in America, especially North America, especially is the economy closing up, and you get major factories and things like that closing down and moving out, and then the jobs go with it, and then people disappear from that community, and that community becomes 5 or 6 houses off the side of a highway somewhere.
Yeah, very, very similar to Canada as well. We see that quite a bit, as I say, rural Alberta, the prairies and things like that. It's just, it is so unfortunately common. But this, I think that's what makes what you guys are doing so important, because you guys are the story keepers, and being able to create these films, you are documenting folklore and history in a way that I think is incredibly important. And I mean, I've got a background in film. Mike has got a background in film as well, and I just think it's really important what you guys are doing.
In the early days, that was the case. I think that's the case on some projects, but I bristle a little bit anymore at like the document, like you're preserving, and I appreciate the sentiment, but I'm just like, there's some projects where you're hitting something that's already been covered a million times. Like your hope is actually that you're going to bring something to the story that hasn't been brought before.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, with a lot of these stories, whether or not I ever cover it, it'll be remembered. But there are special ones in there. I think Momo was really special just because I feel like Momo is one where it was kind of like off the radar. Like it had kind of drifted away, and we brought it back, and today they have a festival, and I don't think a month goes by where I don't get some sort of Google News alert that like a local TV station in Illinois or Missouri did a story about Momo. And the same is true with like Minerva Monster. But I can't, like whether or not I ever made the Mark of the Bell Witch is a defining aspect of Tennessee, and I have no impact on that. The only thing I can hope to do with that kind of story is like bring our own take on it. Jersey Devil is a perfect example, actually, because it's going to stand the test of time whether or not Small Town Monsters ever does anything. But if we can bring some semblance of reality to that story, maybe that'll help play a role in the ongoing history of the legend.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can't thank you enough for being here and taking the time, because I know you guys are so crazy making the next film and doing what you do. And Bloodlines, Curse of the Jersey Devil, tell people where they can download that and find that, because it's amazing.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's on Amazon and iTunes and Vudu, and I forget where else. And our distributor has been rough this year, so it wouldn't surprise me if they just toss it up on Tubi like next week or something. So you might want to look if you don't feel like paying for it. Like you probably wait a week, because they did that with American Werewolves. But yeah, I mean, like it's available everywhere. DVDs and Blu-rays are available at smalltownmonsters.com, and just in general, if you're interested in what we're doing, smalltownmonsters.com is the place to go.
Absolutely.
Great stuff.
Thank you so much, Seth. We so appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Seth.
Here's Morgan for this episode's segment of Spiritual Healthcare.
In this episode's edition of Spiritual Healthcare, the segment of the show where you get to be the creator and designer of your paranormal and spiritual experience, we're going to tell you about a process called Tune into Your Smile process. Sometimes, when things seem overwhelming, the best thing we can do for ourselves is have a preset routine to turn to when we have trouble finding our center. Whether it be because we have experienced an emotional incident, are feeling overwhelmed because we have too much to do, or are simply feeling a bit off, it can be helpful to have a series of steps already in place so we can find our center again. Add this process to your daily practice and see if you begin to feel a shift. Step 1, shake it off. Literally, shake it off. Shaking activates the parasympathetic nervous system, so get up and physically shake your body. Shed the energy. Step 2, breathe deeply. Breathing is exercising source energy. It's flowing through your body. When we aren't breathing correctly, we stifle our inner connection. Step 3, visualize yourself smiling from the inside out. Now, this might seem a little strange, but close your eyes and feel the sensation of a smile throughout your body. You'll be amazed that you will actually begin to feel a distinct shift. Relax into it. Smiling has a vibration. It isn't just an action and a facial expression. When we smile, it changes our brain, and when we continue with the action, even when we don't feel like it, it begins to shift our brain into a different emotional state. As it turns out, fake it till you make it actually might have some merit. Remember, you need nothing to be happy, but you need something to be sad. Remember, at the end of seeking, all is consciousness. Stay in peace, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Supernatural Circumstances, a co-production of Entity Seeker Paranormal Research and Teachings and Good Egg Studios. This podcast is part of the Curious Cast podcast network. Theme music by Corey Johnson of Catalyst Records in Edmonton, Alberta. You can find out more about Morgan Knudsen at entityseeker.ca and more about me and listen to my other show at darkpoutine.com. Feel free to email the show at supernaturalcircumstances@gmail.com. Good night for now.